Good morning, Crawford Chapel. I was asked to bring a word of encouragement, but we're going to talk about today how I grew up. See, in my family, my grandfather used to always tell us, without everybody contributing, nothing gets done. So if you look at this shirt that I have on, it's a picture of my grandparents. And on the back, it spells out my name, Grier. In that name, I think about what my grandfather used to say. If everybody don't pull their part, nothing gets done. So with that name, growth really is everyone's responsibility. To me, this morning, I'm sitting there over the past week or so since Pastor asked me about doing this. I'm toiling with things. And I'm saying, God, you give me the words to speak about. So to me, he said to me, what is your commitment to the church? Same thing as my family's name. We all got to pull our parts. As a treasurer, my commitment to this church is to make sure the finances are straight, that we can exist as a church. The choir's responsibility is to bring forth the music, to encourage everyone. What is your commitment to the church? What are you willing to do? Are you committed to the church or are you committed to the world? So with that, I get to thinking about, we want to grow as a church. How can we grow if we don't commit to the church? In our outreach programs, we go out, we got to minister to people. As an usher, when a person walks into this church, we need to make sure that they feel welcomed. We want them to make them feel like that this is a home that I could be interested in. But if we're not committed to what we're doing as people in the church, how can we ask someone else to come here and commit to us? So again, what are you committed to? Whether it be the finances, whether it be the usher board, whether it be the pastor and the first lady, whether it be the ministers. We can't expect God to do for us what we're not willing to do for him. So each day we wake up, we're asking God, just let me get through this day. Me as a man myself, I've been in car accidents. And I said, oh God, if you let me get through this, I won't do it again. But truly, when we make these commitments to God, are we living in those commitments? Or are we just talking about them? See, because we keep talking about the end of time. We talk about how everybody in the world is doing this. But what are we as people in the church doing for God? Are we living for him or are we just existing? I'm not trying to preach to anyone. I'm not a preacher. I'm just talking as a man. See, again, my grandfather used to be on us. Fitz, Aaron, Val grew up around us. My cousin Rex is sitting back there. She called him Uncle Red. But see, the thing about it with us is if they told you to do something, Jesse May, ain't Flossie. If they tell you to do it, it was only one time. They didn't preach to you about it. See, now kids, they want you to talk to them and talk to them and talk to them. When we grew up, go clean up that cafe. You don't get told more than once. You get a belt. We expect God to keep doing for us when he asks us, stop it. He give us a chance. Whether we living in the world, doing whatever, get in trouble. Some of us are hard-headed. Instead of stopping and saying, you know what? It's time for me to sit down. I'm too old for this stuff. Some of us still want to run the streets. It comes a time when either you commit to God, and I'm not saying you got to sell out everything, but as a leader of your household, if we can't lead our house, how do we expect God to do anything for us? So, I mean, it comes a time when we got to step down and say, you know what? I'm too old for this. It's not that I got to commit and surrender everything to God, but we got to give him some of the time that we expect him to give us in money. We got to give him some of the time we expect him to give us in health. We got to give him some of the time we expect for him to give us in wealth. We don't get rich by just being lucky. We get rich by favor of God. So to me, like I said, I'm not here to try to preach. I'm just here to talk to you as a man, talk to you as an adult. See, I was one of those hard-headed kids that didn't listen. I got in trouble as a kid. My grandfather set me down. He said, boy, if you don't straighten this out, you're going to end up in jail or in a graveyard. I was hard-headed. Got in trouble. I had to grow up. I moved away. I came back a different man. When my grandfather passed away, I was a hothead. I was a person you couldn't talk about Newton Grier to me. Because don't get me wrong, Perry my daddy. But Newton Grier was my father. And I don't want to talk bad about nobody. But any of us old people know it took more than one person to raise us as a child. Then it was a village. It was a village back then. So when he set me down and talked to me, it stuck with me. When my grandfather passed away, I got a father sitting on my side, an uncle sitting on one side. I had this older white man come to the family. And he called my grandfather a shade tree mechanic. That made me mad right there. Boy, don't talk about that man like that. Because you know what? When I needed anything, he was like God to me. I could go to him. If I needed to talk, I could talk to him. Same way we should be doing with God. But when that man said that, it made me mad. I looked at him. Uncle Jack squeezed one leg and Daddy squeezed the other. They thought I was going to jump up and hit the man. I just looked at the man and said, sorry, but my grandfather wasn't a shade tree mechanic. He specialized in what he wanted to do. Same as God. God specialized what he wanted to do with us. You know, he may not make us all the same. He made you a pastor. He made you a minister. I'm a treasurer for the church, but I do a lot of groundskeeping. There's a building maintenance man right there. We all have we got our chairperson back there. We got our she was a recording secretary, now the first lady. We got the leader of women's organization back there. So God has purposes for all of us. We got our praise team here. Are we living in the will of God, or are we living in the will of the world? See, because too many times we want to straddle that fence. I ain't trying to preach to you, but I'm just telling the truth. Too many times we want to straddle the fence. See, it's easy for us to stand here and say, I'm going to do this today, and I'm going to get right tomorrow. But tomorrow's not promised to us. So we wake up and we make conscious decisions as adults. But sometimes we sit here and talk about how the household is going. Well, as leaders of our household, if we ain't right, how can we expect our houses to be right? We can't ask for anything to be right when we wrong. We can't live out here in sin and filth and come into church and say, oh God, I'm ready today. It takes more than that to get ready. See, we got to first get our hearts and our minds right. So again, are we in the will of God or are we in the will of the world? Because too many of us, we sit and we talk about the church. We talk about how the church done changed. The church didn't change. We changed. We decided we want to go both ways. Like you said, when we were kids. Aunt B, she was tough on us. Uncle Ross, up here with the piano. Pastors. But see, again, we knew our roles. We had to live in our roles as kids. Youth Sunday, you knew. If you had that solo that Sunday, you had to be here on Saturday night for practice, because Aunt B gonna tell you, you weren't here for choir rehearsal, so you ain't singing no solo today. Again, we knew what our roles were. We knew what the will of God was for us as a youth. Now, as we gotten older as adults, we forget those things. We didn't forget them. We don't conveniently forget them, because you know what? We can all sit here and talk about the butt whoopings we got. So we didn't forget them. We chose not to live them anymore at times. So again, where are we standing in the church? How can we go ask somebody to come to a church that we're not supporting ourselves? And it doesn't take money to support the church. It does. Don't get me wrong. The church has to survive too. But like I told Pastor, if I'm a carpenter and I'm out of work, I might not be able to tithe for the church, but we're building a building back here. I can still give some time. We don't always get to come to church with money in our pockets, but the efforts, to sit down and talk to people. See, too many times we get caught up in people having conversations about other people and other churches. Well, while we're caught up in those conversations about other churches, sit down and look at your own church. Say to yourself, am I doing the best I can in my church? Am I doing what I need to do to support my church? Because if I'm not, then how can I talk about somebody else's church? If I'm not working in my church to better my church, I can't talk about anybody else's church. I can't expect God to bless my church if I'm not helping my church. If I'm not coming to church, how can I even be a part of the church? We got to give some time back to God and expecting God to give to us. Too many times I've watched it growing up. We talk about the church, but we live in the world. Get in the church. Do what you're supposed to do as a member of the church, whether it be here at Crawford Chapel, St. James, Antioch, wherever. Question yourself, am I doing God's will? Am I living in my purpose? Am I worried about money? Am I worried about wealth instead of my health? What is my future? Because right now, we got another day to make changes in our future. We woke up this morning, like First Lady said, we got law enforcement that didn't wake up. If you turn on the news right now, somebody's child got killed. Somebody's husband got killed. Some of our friends we don't get to talk to no more because they didn't get that second chance. So how many chances do we want? How many chances do we deserve? What is our will? Sadrian, he gave thanks the other week, talking about the house, which I'm happy for. But again, in the will of God, we've all have our wills. He got a blessing. Some of us sit around going, oh, man, I can't get ahead. I turn around and they getting everything. I'm not talking about you, brother. I'm just talking about some people I grew up around. They jealous hearted. I got some friends that when I lived in PA, man, you couldn't talk about any kind of aspirations because, man, you think you better than everybody else now. You done got this and you done got that. Look at you. You uppity now. It ain't about being uppity. Sometimes it's not your blessing yet. When you get your blessing, be thankful for your blessing. My brother, I'm happy for him. He moved to the lake. That was always his thing. He wanted to be on the lake. So, man, I don't want to be on the lake, but I'm happy for you. I'll pick him at time. Hey, I can go fishing up there anytime I want to. But I can't be jealous of his blessing because I don't know what my blessing is. But until I live in my purpose of God, how can I expect what my blessing to be? See, too many times we get caught up in jealousy. Even in the church. The church sometimes is the worst place because you know what? We think that sometimes we can come to God on Sunday, he going to forget what I did on Saturday night when I was mad at. Because, man, look, he got a Cadillac now. I'm still driving this bucket. I work hard. I go to work every day. Seems like he don't do nothing, but how he keep getting lucky? Because it's not in God's will for you yet. When it's in God's will, then it happens for you. But first, we need to be in God's will ourselves. Because too many times we expect blessings without the lessons. What is the lesson? We need to learn to sit down and listen sometimes. We need to learn to pick up our Bibles instead of picking up a can of beer sometimes. Sometimes we need to sit down and talk to our sisters and brothers instead of talk about them. Too many times in the church, we get more envious people than we do in the streets. We come to church, and sometimes I used to laugh about my mom used to say, boy, you want to see some envious people? Go to church on Mother's Day and see how many people come into church just to see what the other women are wearing, their hats. See, we get envious people. My brother sitting there laughing because he knows the truth. We done heard stuff like that. We grew up. So again, what is your purpose? What is your will? See, Again, I'm not here to preach, but I'm just here to talk about what God said to me. What is your purpose? See, my mother, before she left here, she got injured. She was sick. She couldn't work. But again, my cousin Rexy could tell you. My mama tell the ladies, the young ladies in the church here, she said, I'll watch them kids if you're going to work or you're going to get a job or you trying to go to school. She said, I'll watch them kids for you and they ain't going to charge you nothing. She said, but they ain't going to watch them kids for you to run the streets. See, again, back then in the church, we looked out for each other. Now in the church, we just look at each other. So there's times we'll sit here and watch a brother or sister broke down on the side of the road and drive past and talk about, man, I got stuff to do. I ain't got time to be messing with them. That's not how we're supposed to be as Christians, as saints. Not even that, as humans. As humans. We forgot what it was like to be a human. We need to get back to those purposes in our lives. We need to learn to love each other and not envy each other. We need to learn to appreciate each other. And the sad part of it is, we used to talk about other races being like that. And we become those same people. Instead of being proud of each other and saying, you know what, man, if he can get ahead, why can't I? Why can't I sit down and talk to Fitz? Why can't I sit down and talk to Sadra? Why can't I sit down and talk to Rexy? Why can't I sit down and talk to Pastor? See what they doing. See how they got ahead. Maybe they can give me some encouraging words or give me some kind of advice of what I'm doing wrong. But instead, we look over and go, they ain't no better than me. It's not about being better than you. We still got to live in the will of God and not in the will of the world. We get caught up in that stuff too much. We get caught up in the envious. We get caught up in the greed. We worry about money instead of worrying about health and wealth. And the wealth that I'm talking about is where you're going to end up after you leave here. Where you're going to end up when you leave here. Whether I believe it's a God or not, where am I going to end up? Am I willing to risk that? Am I going to do what's right? Because see, it's too many times we're still sitting here looking at each other going, man, I can't get no breaks. I can't get no favor. You work your favors. When you don't do nothing, you get nothing. My mother told me, she said, how can you expect anything out of the world if you don't work for it? The world don't owe you nothing. It don't owe you nothing. God don't owe you nothing. He woke you up this morning. He gave you another chance. He gave you a chance that he didn't give somebody else. He gave you a break that somebody else didn't get. Like Miss Vandy said, he gave her a second chance. I can tell you he's giving me more than a second chance. Because I can sit here and tell y'all right now, I've had 3 accidents on my birthday. 2 of them were supposed to have been deadly. I should have never walked away from. And God gave me a chance over and over again. So yeah, when I came back, I hit the ground running. But you know what? I had to be thankful. I said I was never coming back to Georgia when I left here. My brother called me and he said, man, I need you to come home. I said, let me work out a few things. Where am I at? I came back to the church. My brother said, man, let's go back to church. When my father passed away, he said, man, God telling us to go back to church. I said, wait, so where are we going? He said, we're going back to Crawford Chapel, where we started at. It's a purpose. We keep getting caught up in all this crazy stuff. God puts you where he needs you at when he needs you there. So are we living in our wills? Or are we living in the will of the world? Because see, again, too many times we get chances. If you look around here, we talk about it. But most of these members are people that grew up in this neighborhood, that moved away, had other adventures in life. Why are we back here? It ain't by certain chances. It's by God's will. He brought us back here for a reason. We got too many ancestors that have passed through this church. I mean, I can look around. Names on the walls, that's names. But then when I look at bodies, like I told you, Syria here, see, she doesn't remember me. But her grandmother, she watched me grow up from like this. Again, family. See, black people have not always looked at as blood as family. Family is who you treat like family. Family is what you feel comfortable with. Family is who you love and who loves you. And that woman's loved me from the day I was born. Her and my mother were best friends. We grew up next door to each other. Winona was like my best friend. But again, God gives you the people that he needs you to have when you need them. So what is your will? What is your responsibility to God, to the church? Do you live in his will or do you live in the will of the world? As Pastor always says, naming a title of a sermon, it's not a sermon. But what is the will that you're living in? We get caught up. We forget. You sit down sometimes. Me and Fitz was laughing about growing up. We didn't grow up in just Bremen. We grew up in Villa Rica just as well. We knew so many people. And we look at clips and we laugh and think, boy, what about them good old days? When family was family. When family didn't just talk about each other, but they loved each other. When you came to church, you got love even if your parents weren't here. You didn't get treated any difference. I can remember my mama being sick and not making it to church. And I'm sitting here thinking, boy, I can act up today. Ain't nobody gonna get me today. I'm sitting back there in that corner, me, John Buffington, Fitz. We done went out on Saturday night, we had fun. We sitting back there, we laughing and stuff. Miss Christine sneaks down out the choir stand. She goes around the back of the church and she comes in the back and she grabs one by the ear and she tells the other, you better shut up and you better not say a word. But that's the things you grew up in when the church was a family. Those ladies lived in the will of God because you know what? Not only did they serve their family, they served God's family. On Sundays, these ladies done stayed up all night long cooking this food. They go down in that basement and they stand on their feet and they serve food to us. They made us feel like love. They made us feel like we belonged. We want this church to grow. We're going to have to start living the will of God. We're going to have to start treating people the same way. We're going to have to start putting the time in to make these people feel comfortable coming here. It's going to take us. We can't expect the outside to do it. We can't expect anybody else to stand around and watch us do it. Until we get our hands dirty and start living in the will of God in this church ain't going to grow. And I hate to say it that way. But we can sit here and talk about what we want God to do, but what are we doing for God? If we ain't bringing our families to church, why is God going to help us? We can sit here and say we're praying for our family, but we got to show the efforts too. My grandkids, I'm on them to come to church. But I tell them, like my mom used to tell me, you ain't staying in my house and not go to church. Mama tell us right quick, if you can go out on Saturday night, you going to church on Sunday morning. It ain't no, I'm tired, I'm hungover. You were hungover last night when you was in the club. That's the will of God. Plain and simple, Fitz in there laughing, and it's the truth. That's the things we grew up with. This church was always rooted like that. Sage knew it. Bert was the same way. If I tell you get up and go to church, you getting up and go to church. And they used to tell us, I don't care if I don't go to church. You going to church. Sunday school was the same way. Live right here in the projects. You can walk right up the hill. You going to Sunday school. Mom, I want to go. I don't want. Same thing she told us. Basketball. That was our park. That was our park. We got in this church with no balls dribbled. When the ball hit that concrete until the last amen was said and the church doors were just about closed, then everybody would run home to get changed to come play basketball. But again, I can't say they lost respect for the church, but things changed. People changed. Back then, you knew. Don't dribble a basketball as long as the church going. I don't care who. If you didn't live in Bremen, you knew better than that. You go up there and play basketball you want to. Somebody gonna tell you, man, don't you see they having church? You don't play no basketball now, they having church. I remember Reverend Shelley, when it first started, he said something about, are they going to play basketball while we're having church? Mr. Pong, Granddaddy, Uncle Ross. They know better than that. They know better than play basketball while we having church. Then nobody play no basketball. But again, in the church, we had an understanding. The old men did what they were supposed to do. The women did what they were supposed to do. The pastor did what he was supposed to do. They lived in the will of God. We got to start doing it again as people of, not so much the people of church, but the people of the community. The people of the community. Because Fitz said it about with the outreach. We want to start getting people back into the community. Well, then still, with the people of the community, they're going to feel comfortable coming to church where they feel like they're at home at. We always felt comfortable coming here no matter what. Granddaddy send us over here in the station wagon. Uncle Terry bring us to church, Sunday school in his car. He drop us off. We spend the whole day here at church. But that was still, we were fine with it because it was in the will of the church and the will of God. We're too worried about what's going on at home to be coming to church. We're too worried about what our friends is doing to come to church. We got to start doing better as a church. We got to start living in our wills, in our positions. If you're a minister, make sure that you're leading the congregation properly. As a treasurer, if I'm going to train somebody, I got to make sure I'm doing my job right. Because no matter what, Jess May said to me when I took the position, make us proud, do it right. No matter what your position is, make sure you live in your position. Make sure you do the best of your ability in that position. Because you know what? Not only are we looking at you, our youth is looking at us. We can't have a youth if we're not doing things right. Because it's too easy now for the kids to get caught up in the world. Why come to church when it ain't no fun? Why come to church when they going to stay in church all day? It ain't about staying in church all day. But if we don't get their attentions, the world will. We can lose them to the world or we can gain them for God. That's our choice. But if we don't watch how we do it, we're going to see a lot of them stretched out right here. And the old people used to say, you're going to gather one way or the other. You're going to either gather in their happiness or you're going to gather and cry when they're stretched out in front of us. So which one do we want? Are we going to teach these young men to be men and not be in the streets? Or are we going to teach these young ladies to be ladies and not be out there doing stupid things to hurt themselves in the future? What is our choices? God gave us a will. Everybody talks about your life's in the book of life. Yes. It says that we're written in the book of life already. He knows our futures before we do. But he gives us a choice of free will. Again, there's that word, will. Are we living in his will? That free will that we have a choice. We can choose to do right or we can choose to do wrong. Nobody's perfect. Bible says we sin every day. That's the reason why we repent. We make those choices sometimes. Sometimes we do things out of anger. Bible says be slow to anger. As a human, that's hard to do. I know for myself, it was years it was hard to do, boy, because little match stem, boy, and I was on fire. I was ready to fight, boy. But again, as you get older, you understand. They say either the world gonna break you or you're gonna learn to listen. It's not always the world that breaks you. They said sometimes your best growth is when God puts you in the middle of a storm by yourself and you got nobody to depend on but him. So we're in the middle of a storm right now as Christians, as black people, as human. We keep talking about how the churches are starting to accept things that as Christians we can't believe in. Our belief, if it's our belief, then why aren't we doing what we believe in? if we believe in God the way we say we believe in Him, why aren't we living in Him then instead of worried about what the world's doing? Because if we separate ourselves from the world, then we shouldn't have to worry about what they're doing. If we live as Christians like we say we are, then we shouldn't be worried about whether it be lesbian, gays, whatever. We shouldn't be worried about drugs. But see, if we're caught up worried about that, then we're still not living in God's will, then are we? Yeah, think about it, Pastor, what I just said there. If we're living in God's will, then we shouldn't be worried about the world. We shouldn't have to preach about it every week. We shouldn't have to preach about tithes. If we're living in God's will, because if we're living in God's will, then we're doing what He said there. So why are we worried about the world? Because we're still not caught up in God's will completely. We're still living our own desires. The desires of the heart. See, but if we live in God's desires, then that's nothing to worry about, is it? Because when we look at God and say, hey, give me the desires of my heart, He said, I'll give you all the desires of your heart when you come to me. So if I come to Him, I shouldn't have to worry about what the world's doing. I shouldn't have to worry about what the next man's house looked like. I shouldn't have to worry about what the next man drive. Because the desires of my heart is coming. It's just a matter of when is it coming. It does not say, I'm not going to get it. It said, I'll give you the desires of your heart. So when are we going to stop worrying about the world? Because, see, evangelists sit there. If he's working in Douglasville or if he's working in Atlanta, if he's doing God's will, God's going to look out for him. We ain't got to worry about his car. We ain't got to worry about the area he lives in. Because even with that, God's going to put a hedge of protection around him if we're living in God's will. The Bible says, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. So if we're worried about the weapons formed against us, then we're not living in His will then. We're still worried about the world. How can we live in the world and say we serve God and worry about the world? Because no matter where I travel to, if I get on a plane, if I get on that plane believing in God, I'm good. Because no matter what, if that plane go down, I'm in His will. You know where I'm going, don't you? I'm going to be with Him then if it's my time. So what are we living in? The world or in His will? What are we serving in? What is our purpose? What is our beliefs? Picking up a book and reading it does you no good if you're not reading it with your heart. I can take a break. I could take Shakespeare and read it. And I could quote it. But if I don't believe it, what good is it? That's like the Bible. If I pick up the Bible and read it, I can read it front to back. Quote scriptures. But if I don't believe it, what good is it? What good is it? If I don't believe what I'm reading, if I don't live in the purpose that I'm serving, what good is it? My grandparents used to say, play with the world, don't play with God. If you're playing with God, you're playing with death. Big Mama used to tell us that all day long. Don't say it there, boy, because you used to think it was funny. I remember going to a pure holiness church with my grandmother. And used to think it was funny, boy, because they get to shout. Oh, what's wrong with them, boy? As a kid, you didn't know what was going on. Old folks tell you, you don't sit there and laugh because God working with them people. You didn't know better. You know better now. Why play with it then? What is your purpose? What is your will? What do we choose to serve? Are we serving a dollar and the devil, or are we serving God? See, because again, that mighty dollar, it'll make you change your mind. OJ said for the love of money, that mighty dollar will do a lot of things. Seen a thing on Facebook talking about, would you slap your mama for $1 million? I said to the guy that showed it to me, I said, boy, you must not know my mama. He said, what you talking about? I said, man, if I even looked at my mama like I wanted to slap her, $1 million or not, she'd shoot me. She told me, my mama famous word, I brought you in this world, I'll take you out. And I think that was every black woman's motto at one point. And they were serious about it. Because see, they had a purpose. And they lived. Most black single women that I knew grew up then, they would work hard. They'd give their last dime to their children. But they were going to make sure them children were good. See, that was the one thing about black women. They cherished what was important to them. They gave their all for it. Not saying the black man didn't. But a black woman, I don't always do what I want to, but I do what I got to. I get up and go to work when I don't feel like it, just to make sure y'all got what y'all need. Sandra said this, yeah. It's the look on you guys' faces when that's said. It's the truth, though. That's how God is with us. If we submit to his will, he'll give us what we want and what we need. We don't have to always work hard for it. We just got to believe. What is your faith? How strong is your faith? What is our purpose? Where do we fit in the wheel? And you can take that by your choices or the will of life, because it all goes around. Where do you fit in that wheel? We get on a ship right now. Everybody's got to do their part for that ship to move on a rowboat. Goes back to my family's name. Growth really is everyone's responsibility. In this church, whether you're on the mother board, usher board, it's no deacon board, but the brothers, the pastor, first lady, treasurer, chair trust, whatever. What is your responsibility? What is your will? Where do you serve in that will? Are you doing your part? And if not, how can you expect different? We can't expect God to give to us if we're not giving to him. I conclude with that. Where do you fit in that will?